Hello again everyone, Melth here and ready to roll with more of my Dark Souls challenge run. Among other difficulties, I made a mod to unlock secret enemies which most players will never have seen. Along the way, I'll examine the game's mechanics as well as its lore in detail, so beware of spoilers for all 3 Dark Souls games. Before I get into this episode, I wanted to demonstrate what I said before about fighting the Asylum Demon unarmed. So enjoy this sped up video of me slowly spanking a demon to death. I also had 2 pieces of news. Firstly, YouTube seems to have changed the way their ads work. Previously, they showed ads in my videos whether monetized or not. Now though, it looks like I can get rid of the ads by demonetizing, so I've gone ahead and done that. As far as is within my power, there will be no more ads on my channel. Good riddance. Secondly, a few commenters recently suggested that I create a Patreon so that people can support my content. I'd never really thought about that before, but I'll give it a try. So, if you're interested in supporting my channel, I've created a Patreon. New videos will go live there as soon as I finish them, and I'll also start putting the joke clips from my main videos there, and perhaps create some behind-the-scenes bonus videos about how I work on my main series too. For everyone else, my weekly uploads will continue as they always have. Alright, time for the main event. As I've said before, I'll be aiming to make this series accessible to beginners as well as fun for expert players to watch. I plan to get deep into explaining the combat mechanics of this game, but I'll start with a simple overview of weapon movesets for beginners. I'll also show off the 2 new sorcery spells that I bought last time. For those who want to skip straight into the Undead Burg action, or to the Gravelord phantom enemies that will be showing up for the first time this time, I'll provide links to those parts. Now as you can see, I've changed it to human form. There's no mechanical benefit of that, it's a complete waste of humanity unless you're trying to do co-op. But it's a matter of role-playing and of looking prettier than a hollow. Normally if you're in human form you can also kindle bonfires, but this bonfire has already been kindled. It probably would have been better designed, have this bonfire start off not kindled, have the crestfallen warrior over there tell you about kindling, and give the player 2 extra humanity to do it with. A lot of new players get confused with how kindling works. In any case, I'm going to equip that sorcery catalyst that I bought last time, so I can do sorcery this time. Notice now that my rolls are a lot slower than they were last time. My sprinting speed is substantially slower too, and even my walking around speed is a little bit slower than it used to be as well. I am now at medium equip load. If your equip load, which you can see here, is between 25% and 50% of your maximum, you are at this speed level. Now honestly, for a new player, or someone playing in PvP, medium roll can be a totally valid and effective choice. At least if you're in medium roll because you have good armor or something like that. But I don't. And most things on New Game Plus 6 will instant kill me or do close to instant kills anyway, so it's best to be able to just dodge them in the first place. So I will unequip things until I'm able to get back down to fast roll. Luckily, my long cleric robes will make it look less ridiculous for my character to take off his pants here, except for his now bare feet. I have always held that the existence of fishing waders proves that shoes are nothing but an extremely skimpy form of pants, and the Dark Souls people apparently agree because your shoe slot and your pants slot are the same thing in this game. Having less armor on makes me marginally more vulnerable, but I'll talk later about why that hardly makes a difference right now anyway. But now is a good time to start talking about some of the new weapons that I've got, and how weapons work in general. Let me try out the S-Stock first here, because it's very noticeably different from my current mace. All weapons have a general category. Maces are hammers, and the S-Stock is their first thrusting sword. Rapier type things. Very rapid, very weak attacks generally speaking, but with a few important perks that are worth talking about. Besides these quick thrusts, the S-Stock can also do a side-to-side swing, but I find that not be very useful most of the time. What they are good for is they have a really powerful secret bonus to critical attacks, with riposte especially, but also backstabs. Another thing to know about movesets. With almost any weapon, if you press forward and the attack button at the same time, you'll do a kick. This is mostly useless. It's risky and doesn't do damage. It is good for breaking through shield blocks on New Game, but on New Game Plus 6 it doesn't do enough stamina damage to even accomplish that. An important note is that your kick attacks may look the same, regardless of what weapon you have, but actually, the stamina damage that they inflict varies massively depending on the weapon type. So secretly a kick while you're wielding a heavier weapon is a lot better than a kick with any other weapon, even though visually they look the same, and still of course aren't actually that good. Now my next weapon, the Zweihander, is one that requires too much strength for me to use it one-handed. You'll see if I try it, I just do this clumsy, horrible swing that will do basically no damage even if it does hit. It's also too heavy for me to light roll with it even if I'm wearing basically no clothes. Let me just say, by the way, that a weapon's weight and its required strength are totally different, not even really correlated with each other. Having higher strength does nothing to improve what you can carry or how fast you can roll while you're carrying weapons. All it does is control whether you can wield them at all, and how much damage you do if you hit with some weapon. Whether a weapon requires strength and whether it scales with strength are again totally unrelated. Crazy, but it's the way it is. As you saw right there, the Zweihander has very slow but very strong attacks that cost a lot of stamina. Let me switch up my gear a bit so I can use a shield and do an easy parry and riposte to demonstrate that even though this thing is massively powerful, it doesn't even outdamage what the S-Stock does. That is how good the S-Stock's multiplier is to ripostes and backstabs. Whoa, that was not what I meant to do. Now to attempt a parry, you must not be two-handing at the time. But I'm showing a trick here that I've discovered, that with the right timing, as kind of a bug I think, you can switch back to being two-handed and do a riposte. The animation still looks one-handed, but the damage uses your strength as if you were two-handing it. The Zweihander is quite overhyped. It is a very strong weapon, but it's not as amazing as some people say. What's really unique and good about it, and what making me use it from time to time, is its strong attack. Every attack in the game has a few aspects that matter. One is how much does it impact your damage, what kind of area does it hit, how fast is the animation, how much stamina does it cost, and how much poise damage does it do. Poise damage, totally different from regular damage. I'll talk more about poise later on, but basically it determines whether you stun people when you hit them or not. Secretly, and for no good reason really, the Zweihander strong attack deals 125 poise damage. Way more than any other heavy weapon can deal with any kind of attack. That's 20 times more than the thrusting sword does. It'll stun all kinds of things. Speaking of things thrusting swords are not good at, you can see there it doesn't actually even have a kick. When you do the kick input, you get that flashy but useless backstepping move there. So they are terrible for breaking guards. Another category of fast light weapon in this game are curved swords, like the falchion. Curved swords also don't have a kick. As you can see here, you do these weird cartwheeling backflip things instead. Flashy and cool, but not useful in my experience. As you can see here, it swings very fast. And it actually deals 4 times the thrusting sword's poise damage, so it can stun things pretty well. You can see here that it deals slashing type damage. Most weapons deal regular type damage, and the other two are thrust damage and strike. So just remember that most sword swings don't actually slash in this game. Falchions do though. Damage types are one more thing that I'll get into later. They don't really matter that much against most enemies. But once again, item descriptions can mislead you about them pretty badly. I noticed that although the Morningstar says in one place it deals strike damage, multiple other places say explicitly that it deals thrust damage. So I ran some tests comparing it to other weapons against enemies that are either weak to, or neutral to, or resistant to either of those types of damage. The result is, it deals strike damage. It does not deal thrust damage. One other minor thing the translators got wrong, by the way, is that for both the mace and the Morningstar, they use the word pommel when they mean the head of the mace. For anyone interested, the word pommel came into our language from French, and it derived from a Latin word for apple, and we get our modern word pommel from the idea of beating people with the pommel of the sword. A lot of our English words for sword fighting or armor come from French, because with the Norman conquest, only the new wealthy French elite had those things. If King Harold Godwinson had just put on some extra armor and got onto medium roll at the Battle of Hastings, we probably wouldn't have these language oddities. Most enemies are neutral to all damage types, but some enemies that are super heavily armored or made out of things like crystal or whatever are vulnerable to strike damage and resist slash damage. And some big fleshy enemies are... Whoa, I did that badly. Let me focus on this for a second here. There we go. I should demonstrate the basic moveset before doing the riposte attacks anyway. You can see they're nothing to write home about. Fast, weak attacks, which some big fleshy enemies are vulnerable to, although not all of them. Backstabs with this thing are nothing too special in New Game +6 either, as you can see. This is going to be a really difficult run. I run out of stamina way before enemies die and have to land a lot of backstabs to kill even a basic guy. Oh, he's going to try to do his heal. He has Estus just like we do and can heal himself up. Can't allow that. I wonder what this guy dropped. There are a lot of possibilities. Oh wow, a Titanite shard. Nice! That's a rare drop. I guess I can do a smithing upgrade now. In fact, I'll go back and do that. Interesting. So yeah, change of plans. I'll go back down to the smith and talk about smithing a little bit, although I'll get more into that again when I get to a more appropriate juncture. For now, you just need to know that smithing a weapon will increase its damage a little bit, and also increase how much its damage scales up with your strength or dexterity a little bit. I think I will probably improve the Morning Star, actually, the weapon that I plan to use for the next section here. At the middle of the next zone, infinite amounts of Titanite shards become available, so at that point I can upgrade everything that I want to anyway. Oh, the elevator's not in place. I almost ran off the cliff there. The other weapon I'm considering using this Titanite shard to upgrade is this Y-hander, which I will use a little bit in the upcoming zone. It's just a matter of short-term benefit anyway, though, because once I get to the areas of the game where any kind of Titanite becomes readily farmable or infinitely viable, I'll just generate as much as I need to upgrade all the weapons that I want to use so I can show off a wider variety of the game's weapons. Let me talk a bit about why I'll be using the Morning Star, by the way. It's basically just a worse version of the mace, except that it inflicts the bleed status. This is quite useful even on New Game, but it's very useful on New Game +6 because it deals a % of the enemy's maximum hit point bar. It doesn't work on all enemies, and it does require many successive hits to trigger at all, but it is still quite powerful. Modify, by the way, is the kind of smithing that I can't do yet. It upgrades weapons in a more radical kind of way that changes whether they scale with strength or with other stats, or gives them elemental damage like lightning or magic or things like that. Reinforce just keeps the weapon's basic properties the same, makes it do slightly more damage, and increases its scaling with strength and dexterity, or whatever it currently scales with, by a little tiny bit. As you probably noticed there, by the way, Rickert had slightly different dialogue than last time I talked to him. I think they did a decent job in this game of having NPCs vary their dialogue a little bit when you talk to them about different kinds of things, and just make them feel a little bit more like people instead of like menus in a game. Rickert is not the best example of that, though. He's pretty flat compared to some of the other smiths in the game. Well, let me switch my equipment back to the Morning Star now. The moveset, as I said, is basically the exact same thing as the mace, or pretty much any other hammer in the game. For most weapon types in Dark Souls, individual weapons have a lot of variety in their movesets, but that is not the case for hammers. They almost all have the exact same moves. It's honestly pretty boring. So I won't be using this for all that long, but it will be great in some of these early zones here. It's a fine moveset, it just... having every single weapon of that type do the exact same thing is not as creative as they were with some of the other weapon types. You know, come to think of it, last time I talked about how a lot of new players go off in the wrong direction. They could have fixed that pretty easily, I think, if they had just put a single corpse on this staircase with a soul of a lost undead. Now notice this riposte animation. There are actually 2 hits. The first one just says nominal useless damage. Except it actually inflicts just as much bleed up of the build status as any regular hit does. Let me demonstrate bleed without a riposte on this next enemy over here. I'll just do a series of basic hits here, which you'll see will barely scratch it, and then suddenly it'll lose 30% of its maximum HP all in one chunk when bleed is inflicted. Bam! Massive hit point loss. Basically, every enemy in the game has a secret amount of bleed resistance. It's higher in New Game +6, but not by that much. Every weapon inflicts a certain secret amount of bleed buildup, usually either 30 or 33 points. Enemies are constantly regenerating away that bleed buildup, but if you do inflict enough of it in quick succession to get over their bleed resistance total, they then lose 30% of their maximum HP in one chunk. There are no lingering effects to bleed, by the way. It's not really an overtime debuff, it's just a one-time big chunk of health loss. See here, by the way, that backstabs, like riposte, also have a double hit with this weapon. And the amount of bleed buildup that you get is always flat per hit for any given weapon. Doesn't matter how much or how little damage you deal. Let me show you one cool trick with the S-Shock that I forgot about before, by the way. With thrusting swords and spears, you can attack while blocking. It does less damage and uses more stamina, but you can maintain your block, which is sometimes quite useful. With any other weapon, as I'll now demonstrate, if you do the attack, you stop doing your block, leaving yourself vulnerable. That bomb thrower is dangerous, but mostly stationary. I want to slip past him to kill the ambushing hollows that are waiting just past. There's another guy on top of the stairs, and I want to avoid aggroing him until I've dealt with at least this guy back here. I'll use the staircase itself as cover against the bomb thrower. His bombs do very heavy damage in an area with a lingering hitbox, so quite dangerous on New Game +6. Now sometimes you can fight the bomb thrower alone, sometimes staircase... oh, there he is. I don't want to deal with the 2 of them here in this confined space. I want to lure them away to where I can dodge the bombs more easily. And you know, this is a good chance to talk about how Sorcery works. Sorcery will be one of my main range attack options for a while. These soul arrows are the basic attack. Medium range, a little bit of homing. You can see that they auto-aim pretty well, but it's not flawless. The fact that they do home in kind of undercuts some later lore that talks as if only dark sorcerers home in on people, but never mind that. If this was new game mode, a single soul arrow would easily instant kill these guys. Sorcery is brokenly powerful on new game. Maybe I can demonstrate heavy soul arrow on the other one. It's similar but just a lot slower and more powerful. Oh, I just got some souls. Did he walk off a cliff or something? Lame. Well, my next challenge is gravity and bad platforming controls. You can see that there's an item hidden on the lower level of this aqueduct. But the platforming controls are the most dangerous thing in the Souls series. You can't jump unless you're in the middle of a sprint, and the way to do it is to take your finger off the sprint button for a fraction of a second, and then push the button again, which would normally roll, but while you're sprinting it instead does a jump. I'd like to add, by the way, that unlike a roll, which makes you invincible for a little bit, jumping only makes you vulnerable. There are no benefits to it whatsoever, except for getting across these small gaps. Note, by the way, that your character can't grab onto ledges, and that you don't really gain vertical height while jumping, so even very minor gaps can be instantly deadly when they really shouldn't be. Now, I think they understood in this game that their platforming controls were really not that good, so they thankfully come up seldom. Dark Souls 2 and 3, though, not only failed to improve the platforming controls, but also made them more prominent. A bad combination of decisions, I think. Here we have our first undead rat enemy. They can be quite dangerous, because one of their attacks has a very fast animation, and they all inflict poison damage. How creatures like rats and dogs become undead in this universe, I really don't know. It doesn't fit with the lore that we have about the nature of undead. For those who don't know, by the way, the attack I did there is the last one in any given weapon's repertoire, the jumping attack. Contrary to the name, nothing to do with the jumping controls. They're big and slow but powerful. The best thing about them is that they don't impact with walls or ceilings in narrow spaces. It's not as easy as it should be to get it to work consistently, though. Sometimes you end up with a kick or a strong attack instead, which is occasionally fatal. One great design aspect I want to note, by the way, is that this aqueduct is basically a disguised loading screen. We're now in another zone, but the lack of a loading screen makes it feel more like a real place. Burg, by the way, means a fortified medieval town or a castle, coming to our language from German. Not to be confused with B-E-R-G, Burg, which means mountain. Sadly, although it would seem like a logical place to build a castle, I have never heard of a mountain one being called Burg. This guy is placed where he'll usually throw bombs at you while you fight the other ones, but if you end up pulling them to near the staircase, he kind of just stands there like an idiot. There's also a guy around the corner who will occasionally ambush you with a sudden jumping attack. On the subject of bombs, one thing about the Dark Souls series that I'm not super fond of, I think, is that although hundreds or thousands of years have passed over the course of the series, and civilizations have risen and fallen many times, and at the end of Dark Souls 3 we see the end of all time, technology never seems to either advance or fall into any kind of dark age. They're always just the beginning of the gunpowder age with primitive grenades, but no muskets or anything like that. I know there's Marvelous Chester, but there is no follow-up or acknowledgement of him. He's less a character and more a Bloodborne reference. You know, let me just use Heavy Soul Arrow here. Very big, very slow, packs a punch even on New Game Plus 6, but ammo is pretty limited. Anyway, it's fine to make a medieval fantasy setting, but that these human nations just never change through history is one of those things that make them feel less real and less interesting to me. As you can see, there's an evil vagrant in this room. I'm going to try to separate out the hollow that was lurking in ambush there. He's a good deal faster, at least when he wants to move, and hopefully I can fight him separately and then fight the vagrant on its own. The hollow warrior is being really slow, though. Jeez, get over here. Bleed damage, it's great. It technically does work on vagrants too. I might have been the first person to discover that. Some of the wikis used to list them as being immune to bleed. In fact, they simply have such high bleed resistance that you'll never overcome under normal circumstances. But with a mod like this on New Game Plus 6, I was once playing as a thief character. Thieves start off with a very fast... Oh, I don't like having this guy join in at all. I'd better lure that guy away somewhere. He's kind of a semi-roaming wildcard enemy. There aren't many of those in this game, but he starts off in this place, kind of down below here, and he can aggro at almost any time and just start walking through the level until he finds you. Honestly, I'm not even sure that was intentional. Apparently they planned to have more wandering enemies in the game during development, like the Black Knights were going to do that, but they cut those ideas. This guy only sometimes aggroes at all. It's so inconsistent that I'm not even sure it was on purpose. Anyway, it is at least an interesting element that adds some replay value, I suppose. Though if something like that happened to show up at just the wrong time, it could feel like kind of a cheap shot, I guess. As you can see here, I'm going to try to lure the evil vagrant out into the open, where there aren't as many walls around that can make my attacks ping off. You need to get tactical in this game and think about your positioning, and avoid hitting walls, among other things. That's especially true on New Game +6, where one mistake can easily mean death, and where you can't just kill enemies in 1 or 2 hits anyway. Timing your hits to manage stamina and also balance that out with hit stuns is also important, of course. I've gotten pretty good at that. Anyway, I think I was saying that one time, with a thief character using the bandit knife on the Undead Asylum evil vagrant, who's a lot tougher than this one, I actually did trigger bleed damage after about 100 or so consecutive hits, I think. There are quite a few enemies that are theoretically bleedable, but in real life you'll almost always just kill them with regular damage first. So, some cool bits of scenery here in this ruined castle town building. A lot of people who've only done normal runs of this game probably think this building is totally pointless. One of the neat things about finding this way to turn on vagrants is that many of the game's seeming dead ends turned out to just be places where they housed vagrants for special little bonus fights. Now, sharp-eyed players will hopefully notice the item down there, which is one of the clues about one of the first secret side passages in the game. It's quite easy to find, of course, but that's great for the first one. Teach players that being observant will be rewarded. Speaking of which, this is your chance to notice those guys hanging from the walls and waiting in ambush. If you see that, you can knock them off for free. Oh. Well, usually you can go up and knock them off for free. I don't know what alerted them differently this... Oh, not good. Let me run to a narrow spot where they can't double team me, since there's no way to actually get away. And then I'll go for some ripostes here. While you riposte or backstab, you are invincible. Silly, but very effective against multiple enemies. Having to fight 2 of them at once like this is not great. It can be hard to get the timing right when 2 guys are swinging at you. Which of course is supposed to be your punishment for not seeing those guys and getting caught in their ambush. No idea what alerted them so unusually this time, but glad I solved the problem at least, I guess. That certainly could have been bad. Usually, as I was saying, they don't aggro until you've walked a bit further in, so you have a chance to knock them off for free. But, oh well, I salvaged that with some quick thinking and some good ripostes. I'm not honestly fond of how these backstabs and ripostes become these cinematic attacks that make you invincible. It really takes me out of the action and makes it feel less real, and less visceral. And some of these attacks are so clearly lethal that it's really silly when an enemy stands up afterward and keeps fighting. Oh well, it's a great risk versus reward dynamic overall, and the invincibility really saved my bacon there. Being in that narrow space where they couldn't get past each other also helped a fair amount, of course. Anyway, another easy to miss little side building with another item to get here. Lots of little side treasures that you can find in the Undead Burg. I love how non-linear it is. Now, coming up ahead, there's another one of these ambushes, and hopefully this time I can demonstrate how it's supposed to work. I'll walk here, which is kind of the game's sneak mode. Not usually necessary, but it can't hurt in this case. There we go. Free kill. I have never been able to get the back 2 hollows, though. Those always aggro when I take out the first ones. Well, unless I find a weird, unintended spot to snipe them with a bow or something. You know, it is weird this time that the second one of that second pair came out more slowly. Typically the 2 of them jump off the wall together and fight me. So far, this is a very different and refreshing run of the Undead Burg. I'm liking it. Challenging though it is. That item on the ground is bait, by the way. You're supposed to walk up, pick it up, and then get killed from both sides by the hollows. To emphasize that point, they made it the nominally useless rubbish item. Funnily enough, though, you can actually trade rubbish for a very useful crafting material with Snuggly the Crow later on. You can see now that we have looped back to where we started. I forgot to mention something very cool while I was going through here with Quaidian, so I've come back on another character to show it. Did you know that if you look down from here, you can see the Capra Demon's boss room in Lower Undead Burg? I always knew, of course, that there were spots later on where you can see the beginning of Lower Undead Burg, but I had no idea you could see this spot in so much detail from here. What well put together world design. We have looped back to where we started. This is another thing which people often praise about Dark Souls' level design, that it uses its different 3D layers to make you loop back upon yourself, and this in some cases makes the place feel more like a real environment rather than like a video game level. I generally agree with that, although I think there are a few places where it might be used a little bit too often and makes things start to feel a little bit contrived and less realistic. I think that fog wall we just passed through might be meant to give them a chance to load in the dragon that we're about to see. Not sure about that, though. More important than that Drake, actually, though, we'll be seeing our first Gravelord enemies at long last. I'm sure you've been waiting for them. So, a cool, fun, surprising, harmless moment. If you don't have a shield up, you get staggered, but nothing is around to hit you most of the time, so that's perfectly fine. That was kind of a warning shot. But looking ahead in the distance there, do you see those red enemies? Those are the first Gravelord Phantom enemies, the first of many. The designers place every one of them with individual care that often makes things tactically more interesting than they used to be. On top of that, of course, they're just pretty hardcore enemies. They have lots of defense, they have higher attack than these regular guys that are already pretty lethal, so very dangerous. There's another ambush here which keen-sighted people can probably see, with the hollows hiding behind some of these barricades. Meant to lure you into the middle, I think that crossbowman will spot you and start shooting at you, and if you try to charge him, you get caught up in the ambush. Pretty cool design, I think. Besides being a fun fight, I think there's also just some great scenery here, and while I'm here, looking upward, do you see that big bridge over that tower? Later on in the game, that's actually where we will be when that Drake is fighting us. And over there on the left is a representation of the Undead Parish, the next zone. Looking back over that way, you can see little bits of Firelink Shrine from here. From Firelink Shrine, if you use the binoculars, you can see some scaffolding that ought to be on the outside of this wall lower down, but it's not actually visible here. This is one of several areas in the game where what we see in the distance doesn't quite match up to reality. I don't know whether to interpret this as the designer's idea of what the Undead Burg looks like in-universe, as opposed to the video game version of it that we run through, or maybe it represents an older vision of what would actually be in the game. I didn't find any content that would match that in the map files, though. The game uses either skyboxes or these kind of simplified Model 3D versions of other areas instead of actually rendering in all the unneeded data for that other area. Hopefully I can separate these two guys out. Bleed damage does still work on them. I'm not sure whether their bleed defense was only slightly increased or not increased at all. Their regular defenses were somewhat increased, though. Maybe I can take this one out with... Oh, wait, here comes the other one, okay. Well, I could keep fighting them with riposte and backstabs to use invincibility, or try to stun lock them and hopefully get both of them to bleed, but with a club that's not easy to do. The hitboxes with the club are just not that great. Maybe instead I'll use some heavy soul arrows to chip them down to a state where they're more manageable and more easily killable with melee attacks. Oh, he's stuck up in that window. Will he be able to get down if he shifts a little bit? You can see he's barely even scratched by my attack before. Now, will this hit him? Not from that angle, it won't. Where is the other one? Is he stuck right behind him or something like that? The AI in this game could use some work with its pathing, I think. This angle might hit him, and it might also unstuck him. We'll see about that. No, he's still stuck. It feels cheesy to just kill them while they're stuck like that, so I won't do that. I think if I go back in here, I'll aggro them to run around the right way instead. And then maybe I can fight them from over here. Get some nice shots while they walk across the open space. There we go. Well, I couldn't use bleed damage on that one. I'll do it on the next one instead, just to demonstrate that it works similarly against them. I wanted to say, by the way, that bleed damage being suddenly very useful is something that I love about this new challenge run that I'm doing. Bleed damage was worthless against these guys in the original version because they died too fast. So lots of different abilities and weapons that were garbage in the new game are suddenly going to be quite useful in this game. It really makes for a fun and exciting and very different kind of run. I was hoping to aggro the Red Phantom, but not the crossbowman. Oh well. Rather than dodge crossbow bolts the entire time I'm trying to fight the other guy, I'll lure him back where I'm behind some cover. Anyway, like I was saying, this new challenge really lets me look at this game with fresh eyes, and I just love trying out new things that were not useful tactics in the original version, but are suddenly now. It's a whole different kind of experience. And I highly recommend doing a similar run to any Dark Souls veterans out there. So you can see there that bleed damage took a good chunk off of him, but not enough to kill him, even after a backstab. By the way, enemy crossbow bolts go forever until they hit an object, as far as I can tell. My soul arrows have a medium to short range before they just disappear. My own arrows just kind of fall out of the sky after a certain point. But crossbow bolts go on and on and on. Okay, so now the question is... Wait, what? I have never in my life seen Hollows attack here before. This is crazy. What is going on with this level today? Where did these guys come from? Well, I was just talking about how I can view the game with fresh eyes in this kind of run, and this certainly contributes to that, whatever is going on here. So I'm going to run toward the crossbowmen, get them into this open space where it's easy to dodge around them, and then get back behind cover to try to fight them. I've gotten pretty close to the bonfire, so now I'm minimizing my risks, I would say. Where did they aggro from? Oh, wait, I've got an idea. But I've never, ever in my life, in my own games or anyone that I've seen playing Dark Souls, seen these enemies aggro from where I think they aggroed from, and run all the way through the stage and then try to ambush from behind like that. Oh, that was close. Can't cancel the animation once it starts. Alright, that takes care of this one. Now, where is the other one? Don't want to get ambushed by him. I am not getting killed until I test my hypothesis about where these guys came from. There he is. Well, I had originally planned to just go to the bonfire next. But now I've got to keep exploring until I get to where I think these guys came from. Going to the bonfire would reset them back to their natural state and so forth, and ruin the chance to test it. You know, one thing I was going to say at some point here, by the way, is notice that there's no background music in this section here. There's some ambience of just, Dark Souls sounds, but there's no music here. Firelink Shrine has music, and of course, so did the boss fight, but most zones in this game actually don't. I'm not certain whether I like that or not. It does make the musical moments stand out all the more, like the boss fights. As you can see, this crossbowman is pretty helpless up close. You can hear bombs going off, I'm sure, which are kind of the next obstacle if I was proceeding along the main path after the bonfire. The bonfire would also reset all of his enemies, of course. While I'm in this area, let me go down here to this little room behind the door and get myself a better shield. Not a very good shield, but a better shield. Almost everything is better than the east-west shield the cleric starts off with. Anyway, I was going to say that the lack of music in most areas, of course, heightens it in places that do have it. And that's a good use of the medium, it's pretty clever. It reminds me of how, for example, in the movie Schindler's List, everything is black and white, except for the little girl in the red coat, which of course just stands out. But it does miss a chance to use music to set the mood, or to have a more creepy, interesting ambience or something like that. Anyway, you can see that these guys have spears. The previous versions of these enemies that I fought had swords, and were actually a lot easier as a result. Just like if the player uses a spear or a rapier, they can turtle up behind their shields while still attacking, leaving no easy opportunity to hit them at all. So you can either circle them and go for a backstab, which is doable but sometimes tedious and quite silly, so you kind of spin around them. Or you can try to kick down their guard, but that won't work in New Game Plus 6. Their stamina is too high, you just can't really deplete it reasonably. The alternative though is to try to hit them, because their AI is set up where if you hit them, they see an opening as you bounce off the shield and they then try to attack you. And then you go ahead and riposte them. And then I'll get behind this one while he's down and finish the job once he stands up. Notice, by the way, that these spear versions of this enemy drop more souls than the sword or crossbow variety do. So the designers apparently knew they were more of a threat. Alright, come on, I want you to hit me. Hit me. You know, after doing a big, flashy riposte like that, doesn't it just seem like it'd be awkward when they stand back up to continue the fight? Doesn't happen in a new game, of course. These boxes conceal another secret passage, by the way. Again, a reward for the observant, and people who just experiment and try to look around. Another reward for the observant, you might catch that cute little ambush back there where the guy breaks out from behind the bookshelves. You know, I feel like a backstab would be even more awkward. Especially with some of them where you sneak up behind them and just impale them all the way through with your sword and drop them to the ground, which should of course kill anybody. What the heck would you say to somebody who gets up after that and continues to try to fight you? I wouldn't want to have that conversation. Speaking of conversation, this guy here will often be heard talking to an unseen thing called Yulia. One common theory is that he might have originally been petting a cat with that hand motion he's doing over that barrel. Ah, but look over there. You can see that spot where normally there are 4 hollows waiting. There's only 2 of them. So those 2 hollows that came up from behind me at one point must have gotten aggroed out of there somehow, climbed up that ladder and come up from behind me. Crazy. I've never so much as heard of that happening before. Cool stuff.
Well now, you seem to have your wits about you, hmm? Then you are a welcome customer. I trade for souls. Everything's for sale.
This guy has some cool stuff for sale, but there's even more cool stuff available if you kill him.
Things are getting treacherous in these parts. A horrible goat demon has moved in below.
Something about the way he says a horrible goat demon always just sounds funny to me. This is our second warning shot about the humongous drake, notice that.
This place, it might end up being your grave.
How in the world and why these 2 demons got here is one of the unexplained and probably not thought through aspects of Dark Souls' background lore. We don't really find other demons on the pathways between here and where the demons originated from. Most of this guy's items can be bought somewhere else later on in the game, sometimes at a better price, but there are a few things that are unique to him. Repair powder was unique to him until the DLC. I still think it's worth buying one of them, just in case something happens to one of your weapons from an acid attack or something like that. I think he's the only source on throwing knives, except for a guy in the DLC who sells them at an overpriced rate, too. Throwing knives are cool, but not very useful, though. He sells some items here that are relevant for multiplayer, but he'll drop all those things if you kill him. He also drops his special sword, which might also be the Yulia he's talking to. Either way, it probably shows that hollowing is making him go crazy and talk to inanimate objects or things that aren't there. The scimitar is just a less good version of the falchion, but the rapier I'm going to buy. Compared to the S-stock, it has less reach, and doesn't have the slashing attacks, but it actually does more riposte damage, which is what I want to use a rapier for anyway. It really is one of the best riposte weapons in the whole game. The reinforced club is pretty much a straight upgrade over the Morningstar. Since I've upgraded the Morningstar, the difference will be a little bit slighter, but I think the reinforced club will still probably be better. I'll check. You can only get the reinforced club from this guy, and it is worth having. Not the most exciting moveset, but it's very effective. It inflicts bleed, it has great base damage, doesn't require many stats. What else could you ask for an early game weapon, really? Club is just another generic hammer, not worth getting. You could buy the spear and show its moveset, but it's pretty simple, and also enemies will drop one pretty soon anyway. It has a pretty common drop rate, so I'll skip it for here, I think. I'll get the bow to have a longer ranged option than soul arrows. He really has a good selection, and some of these things are not obtainable anywhere else. Shield specialized for parrying? Yes, please. It gives you a longer window of active parry frames. I'll talk more about that later. The heater shield is something that everybody should buy from this guy. He doesn't drop it on death, it's uniquely available only from him, and it's a phenomenal shield, one of the best in the game. It has 100% physical block, the lightest weight of any shield that has that criteria. It has medium deflection, I'll talk more about that later on, but that's really good. Secretly, it even is extra good at parrying, although not quite as good as the other shield that I just got. The code of mail he sells used to be unique too until the DLC, but it's not really worth buying, it's pretty useless. You can buy crossbow bolts from him, although plenty of other people sell those too. I'm not a huge fan of crossbows in this game. They can be a bit of a time saver when going for the Drake Sword in an upcoming area, but other than that, I will almost never buy bolts from this guy. You can't conveniently manually aim them like you can with arrows, so I wouldn't say they're really that good for long-range combat. Long-range combat isn't really that good anyway, because you do much less damage, but it's great for aggroing enemies to you out of formations.
Thank you kindly.
Another guy laughing at all his dialogue. The pattern will continue. Anyway, later on, to get his mostly unique weapon and so forth, I will be killing him, but I'll try to get all his dialogue first, and wait for some kind of excuse in character to do it. This is the case where I have to balance out my goal of role-playing with my goal of showing as much as possible of the game's content. Well, normally, there are 4 guys waiting down here. It makes a slightly tough fight. But somehow or other, when I was way up above, 2 of them got aggroed and climbed up that ladder in the back and got onto a roof and ambushed me from behind. And these guys didn't aggro for some reason. Let me check if the reinforced club's damage is better than an upgraded Morningstar. Okay, yep, even with the upgrade it's better. Yep, reinforced club is pretty good. It sees a lot of use on soul level 1 runs, which are a common kind of challenge run people will do where you just basically don't level up. I did a level 1 run before, but honestly I don't recommend it. For one thing, they're pretty boring because you just can't use most of the game's weapons or spells. And if anyone tries to impress you by implying that soul level 1 runs are hard, don't be fooled. Soul level 1 is code for Pyromancer. Pyromancy is at full power regardless of your level. It would be much harder to do a level 3 run where you play as one of the classes that can't get any access to magic. Even that wouldn't be that difficult though, because a lot of the game's weapon upgrades go to full power regardless of your level too. Well, I'm now up on the roof that those hollows climbed up to and dropped down from, and I'm now overlooking a place where there's a jump that might look possible but is not really feasible to do. But from up here we can actually do it. It's another cool loop back to near the start of the stage to get a secret item. This balcony of the house or whatever it is overlooking where we started off. So here we get yet another ranged option. They just gave us throwing knives, they just had us talk to a merchant who sells bows, now we get a crossbow too. Clearly, they really wanted everybody to have ranged options available. The way crossbows work is to do decent damage that doesn't scale up with your stats, so they're at full power basically at low level. The shot comes out almost instantly, but reloading is mandatory and very slow. Sometimes they have some surprise value in PvP, or can be used to force an enemy to move a little bit. Let me just demonstrate how they work here. They're not usually very good in my opinion. The slow reload time is not a handy feature. You might have been able to hear I was mashing the roll button there, but I just could not move until the reload finished. A lot of animations in this game are like that. They can't be cancelled until they finish. That's just kind of part of the challenge. You need to commit to your actions and be sure they're actually good before you click the button. Logically, in character you probably should be able to stop doing some of these things before they're finished, but it makes the game work. That door in the distance always looks kind of weird from this side for some reason. Sometimes I see it flicker white or just have weird moving white patches on it. Well, I have reached the bonfire checkpoint, and I think there's a lot to talk about in this episode already with all the crazy enemy shenanigans and so forth. Not much lore in this one, I suppose. Most of the Undead Burg is just kind of a generic town. Oh, notice the ladder up there, by the way. Later on we can send that down here to create a shortcut, which is pretty cool. But it is another case where we face these pretty arbitrary, small physical obstacles that we just can't get past. Instead of climbing this thing, Dark Souls Man will fight his way through a whole horrible castle full of enemies, slay a giant bull demon thing, deal with a dragon. So this is one of those places where, yes, the world design is really cool. It's great how the world loops back on itself like that. But it does sometimes sacrifice believability rather than enhance it. Anyway, level up time. I could take some attunement to equip my heal spell too, but that's not super useful right now. Or I could level up my faith, which is not at all useful now, but will eventually unlock some fun spells later on. Or I could do the smart thing and level up my endurance and vitality so I can carry more stuff and stop dying in one hit. I'm going to do the dumb but fun thing and level up my faith. I want those cool spells in a bit. Alright. You can see the enemies have respawned and are waiting for me to take my next crack at them. Until then, don't you dare go hollow.